as an itinerant monk, gave Vivekananda an insight into the unifying elements within all manner of diversities in the life of ordinary Indian people. To my mind, this was a very important part of Mahatma Gandhi's own intellectual development as well. The second factor, I think, was Swami Vivekananda's universalist outlook in the domain of religion. This is too obvious and needs no elaboration. Building upon the teachings of his preceptor, famous for his saying, Joto Mot, Toto Pot, he developed a religious universalism. And this liberated his mind from the divisive mentality that constrained many other spiritual leaders of his times who were destined to address only one religious community. I think there's a third factor, which was perhaps his social origin. It is customary in our country to erase the Grihasthashrama or the status before the sannyasi takes his vow. But as a historian, we have to remind ourselves that Narendra Datta belonged to a middle class which played a very important role in bringing together various parts of India. Not only in the Indian National Congress, but even in their daily life, the way they spread all over India. I believe Narendra Datta's belonging to such a class was important because it was from this class the National Congress drew its supporters. It was this class which flocked to listen to Vivekananda's orations, in English of course, in distant Madras or Tanjore or Pune or Almora. This was the class that cultivated a discourse of India's unity. No doubt Vivekananda had renounced the world as a sannyasi, but his social location and the class he addressed remained important. Finally, I believe Vivekananda's travels abroad, his long tours in East Asia and Europe, and long residence in USA and England also contributed towards forming a sense of cultural specificities of his own country. As it has been famously said, who knows England if only England he knows? This applies to any other country, to our own country. The realization of Indianness dawned upon many of us when we went abroad. The cultural differences between various languages or religious sects or castes sink into insignificance viewed from abroad. It reveals to us the homeland as one whole, distinct from other lands. That this happened with Swami Vivekananda is clear from his letters from abroad. So I think these were the factors: his experience as a traveling sannyasi, his universalist religious outlook, his location in a class that began the discourse of cultural unity, and his perspective developed abroad. All this, I think, contributed to making Swami Vivekananda one of the earliest expounders of the idea of cultural unity. For all these reasons, he developed a world outlook which gave a central place to the notion of India's cultural unity. And if you look at the bare bones of the logic of it, was very simple. The logic of it was that India did not possess the kind of political unity which European countries had developed. In the absence of such a political unity, what would unite India? It would be only, if you think of India as a civilization, that you can ascribe to India a unity. And therefore the notion of a cultural unity was necessary as the first step towards developing political unity. And this unity was ascribed to a civilization that predated British rule. However, there was a problem. The problem was that, however attractive the notion of an ancient unified culture may be, there were in everyday life experiences which contradicted that. There were differences between castes, between communities, religious beliefs, language areas, and so on. And therefore, an additional notion had to be developed, and this was the notion of syncretism, or the growth of a composite culture, the compositeness of Indian culture, and hence the famous phrase, unity in diversity. Vivekananda himself has often spoken of this almost in terms of Vedantic monism. Rabindranath Tagore spoke of this as early as 1902 in a famous essay on the history of India. In 1909, in Hind Swaraj, Gandhi almost came to that point, though not exactly in fully developed form. But in this manner, Renaissance India came to deal with the problem of diversity, and at the same time try to retain the idea of a unity that was independent of imperial rule, the unity brought about by British rule. I think this is the logic which drove the minds of many of those who spoke in the late 19th and early 20th century about Indian unity. And I expect that some of the papers that we shall listen to today and tomorrow, tomorrow and thereafter, would address these issues, and there will be many other issues that will be raised by them. All I need to say for the present is that I look forward to the presentations to be made and to learn from the distinguished scholars who have kindly agreed to participate at this conference. Thank you.
Revered Swami Nityasthanand Ji Maharaj, Acharya, Probationers Training Center, Belur Mutt. He is the former editor of the Kannada monthly Vivek Prabha, published from the Mysore Center. Maharaj has been the head of the Ramakrishna Mutt, Mysore, and is at present an Acharya at the Probationers Training Center, Belur Mutt. I now request Revered Swami Nityasthanand Ji Maharaj to give the keynote address of the seminar.
Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Revered Swami Suviranand Maharaj, Swami Suparnanand Maharaj, and brother monks, and honorable dignitaries on the dais, Dr. Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, Padma Vibhushan K.G. Subramanian, and Mr. Saroj Ghosh, and other dignitaries, my dear friends. As it is pointed out, when we think of cultural unity of India, we wonder whether there is any unity at all in its heart. There are baffling varieties all around of different varieties on different areas of human life and society. but at the same time, we boldly speak about India's contribution to the world culture. If there is any contribution from India to the world culture, there must be some sort of uniqueness of Indian culture and civilization, and also some sort of unity of Indian culture. Swami Vivekananda, as we all know, enthusiastically speaks about the contribution of India to the world culture. Though sometimes it is not universally recognized, rather sometimes ignored also, but it is a established fact. India's contribution to the world culture is very great. Not only in the areas of religion and spirituality, but in the areas of other branches of knowledge such as science, the astronomy, mathematics, music, literature, art, etc. Even though the spectacular advancement is made in the West in the modern times in these areas, we can identify most ancient civilizations from which the culture and civilization spread to the other parts of the world. Among them, mention can be made of very important civilizations: Chinese civilization, Indian, the Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman. Even among these, it seems India's share of contribution is greater than other civilizations. A.L. Basham speaks about this. India deserves a larger share of the credit than she is usually given, because on a minimal assessment, she has deeply affected the religious life of the most of the Asia and has provided very important elements in the culture of the whole of Southeast Asia, as well as extending her influence directly or indirectly to other parts of the world. So it is also known that India's contribution is great in the world unity also, because at least at present, we are compelled to accept the multiculturalism, because most of the nations at present are converting themselves into multicultural, multireligious. As we know, India for thousands of years stands out as a great epitome of multiculturalism. And as such, it can be object lesson to the world also, world unity also. Swami Vivekananda says about Indian social situation and cultural situations, a veritable ethnological museum, he says. An ocean of humanity composed of these race waves, seething, boiling, struggling, constantly changing form, rising to the surface and spreading and swallowing little ones, again subsiding. This is the history of India, Swami says. And another point, as it already pointed out, Indian culture is not a melting pot in which everything is made into one. Its special feature is the diversity, unity in diversity. It's not homogeneity, as it seems to be the case in the Western condition, Western nations. So India stands for a diversity, unity and diversity, welcoming different kinds of cultures, foreign as well as indigenous, and accommodating them and allowing them to retain their cultural identity, uniqueness. This is one of the most important features in Indian civilizations. So even we can trace the cultures of thousands of years back in India now. This is the most ancient living civilizations in the world as it is considered to be. As Swami Vivekananda humorously points out, if Manu came back today, he would not be bewildered and would not find himself in a foreign land. He told this 100 years back. Even though Manu comes, perhaps he will not be bewildered to see the ancient culture living even today. So this is one of the most important factors of Indian culture. Arnaud Toynbee, the great historian, as you know, he says about the contribution of India to the world unity. He says, are we going to let this consciousness of our variety make us fear and hate each other? In that event, we should be dooming ourselves to wipe each other out. Or are we going to learn to live together like a single family? This is the only alternative to mutual destruction. But to achieve this high degree of amity, we have to value a variety of our human heritage. We have not merely to appreciate our neighbors' distinctive contributions. We have to have these as precious parts of mankind's common treasure. And we have to love our neighbors themselves as precious members of a human family, which is now exposed to the common danger of being wiped out by atomic warfare. This is why India's conspicuous achievement of variety in unity is a worldwide importance. So it has got it's a role model to the world unity. India can be considered to be so. India, even though there has so many different varieties of cultures and languages and customs and traditions are there, we should not think that India is only a mixture of different cultures. There is a underlying unity is there. Its own uniqueness is there. A great sociologist, Edward B. Toiler, he defines culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. This is a very comprehensive definition of culture, including all the aspirations, all the human endeavor within itself. And it is widely quoted, of course, and it remains one of the concept of dharma in Indian situation. Concept of dharma also includes all the aspirations of human life. It covers both secular and spiritual. As it is defined, in Sanskrit, yataha abhyudaya nishreyasa siddhi sa dharmaha. So that is dharma from which the both abhyudaya and nishreyas is achieved. Abhyudaya refers to material development, social development, and nishreyas refer to moral and spiritual development. Both are equally important. One should not give greater importance to either of these. That's why Swami Vivekananda is very particular. We have to develop in both the fields, Abhyudaya as well as Nishreyas. If both are there, then only society can be in a healthy condition. So that is why this comprehensive definition of dharma we can attribute to the Indian concept, Indian situations. So all human aspirations are included in it, and also it remains one of the higher values of human life as enumerated in Hindu tradition, that is Purusharthas. As we know, there are 4 Purusharthas are there. What are the Purusharthas? It is said in Sanskrit, Purushehi arthyate iti Purusharthaha. That means Purusharthas are those, they are the human values. They are called human values because they are sought by human beings. That is why they are Purusharthas. They are hierarchically, classed like this. That is Kama, Artha, Dharma and Moksha. But in a general enumeration it is said, the Dharma and Moksha come at the end, and Kama and Artha sandwiched between these two. Thereby indicating that Dharma, Artha and Kama must be fulfilled without violating the Dharma, and at the same time without forgetting the higher human aspiration, that is highest human value, that is spiritual emancipation, moksha. So these two are very important. So that is why it is said in Sanskrit itself, Anteshu remire dhiraha nate madhyeshu remire dese. That means as one spiritually progresses, morally spiritual progress takes place, the one will delay in the middle to, in the end to, not in middle to. That is, he always takes delight in the end, that is two ends, that is dharma and moksha, not in the middle to, that is artha and kama. So that is how one has to evolve oneself in one's own life. This here, the word kama does not refer as it is generally understood, for sense gratification, but actually it indicates the basic human values, the food, shelter, security, and all such things. Without these basic values are fulfilled, the higher pursuit cannot be possible. So basic values are very important. And of course, when we are fulfilling these basic values, some amount of sense enjoyment also involved in it. And it is a cultural aspect of it. The man wants to eat food. He wants to tasty food, not mere filling his stomach. He wants tasty food. In that way, the art of cooking has developed. He wants to see beautiful things. He wants to listen to beautiful sound. He wants to read beautiful, good literature. This is how, when the aesthetic value is added to the basic value, then culture emerges. The crude, sensuous man will convert himself into a refined, sensible person. This is how the basic value must be included with the harmonized with the aesthetic values. So this is how culture develops. So then artha is generally understood as a wealth, a means of sense gratification. But actually artha means a secured position in the society. Man wants to be somebody in the society. He wants some kind of position in the society. He wants to lead a meaningful life in the society, relating himself to the social conditions, situations, and other human beings. So for that he needs these kind of power, position, wealth, all these things are necessary. There is nothing wrong in that, unless these things are not pursued unscrupulously. So that means all these things are basic necessities which without these things man cannot achieve anything higher. And again another greater higher value is dharma. Dharma is the basis for all the human pursuits. Dharma constitutes all the rules and regulations pertaining to different areas of human life. It's a discipline. One has to follow discipline in every human endeavors, in every human field. So that constitutes dharma. And again there is another highest value, paramapurushartha, that is the moksha. So it is the highest value of human life. So this constitutes the most important aspect of human endeavor, and this constitutes the unifying factor in the Indian civilization. This integral approach to human values constitutes one of the most important characteristics of Indian culture, originated by the Vedic rishis, developed in the Bhagavad Gita, and powerfully articulated by Swami Vivekananda at modern times. So this is originated in the Vedic ideology itself, Vedic rishis, Vedic lore itself. So that is why, and as you know, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is very well developed. And Swami Vivekananda, as we are all aware of, is very powerfully proclaimed this to the modern world. Swami Vivekananda's, the concept of all-inclusive concept of religion, Sister Nivedita says, if the many and the one be indeed the same reality, then it is not all modes of worship alone, but equally all modes of work, all modes of struggle, all modes of creation, which are paths of realization. No distinction henceforth between the sacred and secular, no Abhidaya, no distinction between Abhidaya and Shreyas, all are same. To labor is to pray, to conquer is to renounce, life is itself religion. To him, the worship, the study, the farmyard, and the field, as true and fit scenes for meeting of God with man as the cell of the monk or the door of the temple. To him, there is no difference between the manliness and faith, between true righteousness and spirituality. According to Swami Vivekananda, art, science, and religion are but three different ways of expressing the single truth. Unity has its foundation in religion. This is the rationale of Swami Vivekananda's declaration that religion is the backbone of India. In India, all reforms program and revolutions are preceded by religious awakening. Pioneers of all great movements, including political, are inspired by some religious ideology. You can trace the religious inspiration behind every form of Indian art in India. So that is how every aspect of Indian life is based on the religion. That's why Swami Vivekananda says in India, they eat religiously, they sleep religiously, they work religiously, they even steal religiously. So religion forms the background of every activity, every human endeavor, every human aspiration in India. This is the most unique factor in Indians, unity of culture. And this is how India survived for thousands of years, because of this unity, religious unity. And this accounts for the Hindu-Muslim unity for hundreds of years. This is the most unique fact in the world history. It is recognized as the most unique feature in the world itself, because nowhere in the world there was such a unity, except in India. About that, Sir John Marshall says, seldom in the history of mankind has the spectacle been witnessed of two civilizations so vast and so strongly developed, yet so radically dissimilar as the Mohammedan and the Hindu, meeting and mingling together. The very contrast which existed between them, the wide divergent in their culture and their religions, make a history of their impact peculiarly instructive to the whole world. This is the most important factor. Of course, later on it developed some cracks, it is a different matter. On this point, I want to quote Vincent A. Smith, a great historian. The most essential fundamental Indian unity rests upon the fact that the diverse people of India have developed a peculiar type of culture or civilization utterly different from any other type in the world. That civilization may be summed up in the term Hinduism. India primarily is a Hindu country and a land of the Brahmins, who have succeeded by means of peaceful penetration, not by the sword, in carrying these ideas into every corner of India. India, beyond all doubt, possesses a deep underlying fundamental unity, far more profound than that produced either by geographical isolation or by political suzerainty. That unity transcends the innumerable diversities of blood, color, language, dress, manners, and sect. Providing a substantial evidence for the fundamental unity of India, Radha Kumud Mukherjee concludes, thus has India been helped both by nature and nurture, by her geographical conditions and experience, by her religious ideas and political ideas, to realize herself as a unit, to pursue, preserve, and promote her individuality in fulfillment of her heaven-pointed mission in the cultural history of the world. But there is one very unsavoring factor, that is, in spite of the fact that we welcomed the foreign cultures and accommodated them in our own land, but one social segment of our own motherland suffered a social segregation for thousands of years. Swami Vivekananda calls it a national sin. He, with a throbbing heart, he says, no amount of politics would be of any avail until the masses in India are once more well educated, well fed, and well cared for. If you want to regenerate India, you must work for them. The cultural unity implies the unity of all sections of society, bringing the common masses into the main cultural stream. So we have to go to the masses. We have to change their mindset and give them the higher values and cultures which is denied to them for thousands of years. We have to bring them to the mainstream of the society and the culture. That is Swamiji's dream. We have to fulfill that Swami Vivekananda's dream. That is the greatest homage that we can pay to Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda says, fervently, it is Swami Vivekananda's fervent appeal. 100,000 men and women, fired with the goal of holiness, fortified with the eternal faith in the Lord, and nerved to lion's courage by their sympathy for the poor and the fallen and downtrodden, will go over the length and breadth of the land, preaching the gospel of social rising up, the gospel of unity and equality. This is what Swamiji's call for us all. And Swami Vivekananda says, as individual unity, as it is important, so social unity also is most important. How individual unity, integration of personality takes place. There are different layers of personalities are there. The physical, mental, intellectual, etc. But there is a central point, central personality, that is spirituality, divinity, as Swami Vivekananda puts it. Swami Vivekananda says, how the integration of personality, harmony of personality takes place. Only when we hold on to the center of personality, the divinity, spiritual element in personality, and holding on to that, we have to integrate our personality. So that's what Swamiji says, manifest divinity. And everything will be harmoniously arranged around it. Same thing applies to the nation also. There is some central point is there. Swami Vivekananda says it is India is a central point, core of Indian culture is religion and spirituality. You have to raise that. You have to awaken the spiritual element in the nation, national level also. That is why Swamiji said, before spreading the land with political and social ideas, you have to deluge the land with the spiritual ideas, he said. We have to do that. Through that only the regeneration of India takes place. Let us all try to fulfill Swami Vivekananda's dream. Thank you all. Namaste.